My name is Carla, and I am a single mother. My daughter Naomi has lived her life in a constant balance with severe asthma, the kind that can tighten her lungs without any warning. I spent years learning how to read the smallest shifts in her breathing, memorizing every medication schedule and preparing for emergencies before they even appeared. I believed that as long as I stayed close, I could keep her safe, and for a long time, that belief was the only thing that helped me sleep. I did not realize how fragile that sense of control truly was until a few months ago, when Naomi suffered a serious respiratory episode and had to be admitted to the pediatric respiratory recovery unit in Colorado Springs. The room was filled with the steady sounds of machines monitoring her oxygen levels and breaths. Those monitors were supposed to be our final line of protection, a system designed to alert nurses the moment something changed. During that time, my sister Roxanne appeared with a gentle smile that suggested concern and support. I allowed myself to believe she was there for us, that she understood the gravity of Naomi's condition, and that for once, our complicated history could be set aside. Everything changed the day I stepped out of the room for only a few minutes. The monitoring alarm was disconnected, and Naomi was found without a pulse for 5 minutes before the medical team was able to bring her back. Those 5 minutes showed me that danger does not always look like illness. Sometimes it looks like someone you thought you knew. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. If someone in your family intentionally put your child's life at risk, what would you do? Share your thoughts below and stay with me through this story. Before everything that happened, our story began much earlier inside our home growing up. Roxanne and I were raised by our mother, whom we both call Mom. We were close in age, yet it always felt like we lived in different worlds under the same roof. I was the quieter one, the child who sought comfort in books and drawing, while Roxanne always seemed to move with a kind of certainty, like she believed she already knew her role in the world. People called her strong because she never asked for help. I was called sensitive because I felt everything deeply. As we grew older, those roles seemed to solidify. When Mom began having health issues, Roxanne became the one who drove her to medical appointments, filled prescriptions, and kept track of the practical details that accumulated faster than anyone expected. I was already living on my own by then, trying to figure out how to take care of myself and survive emotionally after a relationship had ended and left me facing motherhood alone. When Naomi was born, Mom shifted her time and focus toward supporting me, often staying with me during the difficult early months when Naomi's asthma symptoms began to show. I needed help, and Mom offered it without hesitation. I never considered how this looked through Roxanne's eyes. To me, it felt natural that Mom would want to be there for her grandchild and for the daughter who had suddenly found herself raising a child alone. I did not see that Roxanne, who had spent so many years being the dependable one, now felt replaced by a new version of what Mom considered important. She had been the one who held everything together for so long, yet the moment I needed help, the center of gravity shifted toward me. Mom never intended to hurt Roxanne, but her kindness toward me fed something raw in Roxanne that none of us recognized. Roxanne began to believe that the only way to be loved in our family was to be needed. But she was always the one who appeared strong, so no one thought she needed anything. That belief hardened into resentment, not loud or dramatic, but quiet, steady, and enduring. It was resentment shaped by the idea that I got attention, not because I earned it, but because life had broken me enough for others to step in and support me. Looking back, I can recall the way Roxanne would offer help with Naomi's medication or routines. But there was always a tone that felt like an evaluation, as if she believed I was someone who would fall apart if left alone. At the time, I thought she was simply trying to be helpful and practical. I did not realize she was measuring herself against me, weighing every moment Mom spent with me as evidence that strength had no value unless someone was visibly struggling. Roxanne and I never spoke about it directly. Our conversations about family were polite on the surface, and beneath that, there was an entire ocean neither of us acknowledged. I did not see the resentment forming. I did not realize she felt invisible. I did not understand that she thought love needed to be earned by holding everything together, while I simply received it because I appeared to need it. If I had recognized what was happening back then, perhaps I could have changed the direction of things, but I did not. I was too focused on Naomi and surviving each day. I did not know that something inside Roxanne was quietly tipping, tilting towards something that would soon become dangerous. 2 days after Naomi was admitted to the hospital, the hallway outside her room had already become familiar to me. I recognized the rhythm of the ventilators from neighboring rooms and the soft footsteps of the night shift nurses. I sat beside Naomi's bed most of the time, speaking to her quietly while the monitor beside her displayed the numbers that meant everything. I watched every rise in her chest, each slight whistle in her breath. I stayed alert because I had learned that medical stability could change in a matter of seconds. Roxanne arrived later that morning. She walked in with a calm expression that seemed almost too controlled for a pediatric recovery wing. She greeted me in a quiet tone and said she wanted to see how Naomi was doing. Naomi was resting, so I stepped aside to allow her space. Roxanne moved closer to the bed and studied the monitor longer than most visitors usually would. Her eyes remained fixed on the oxygen saturation graph. I noticed her face was thoughtful, but I could not tell what she was thinking. It did not feel like gentle concern. It felt closer to calculation. When Nurse Elaine entered the room to record vitals, she asked how the night had been. I told her Naomi had experienced some shallow breathing episodes but had stabilized with treatment. Elaine reviewed the monitor as she listened. Roxanne asked a question that caused my chest to tighten. She asked whether the alarm sensitivity could be adjusted, mentioning that Naomi seemed to become distressed when the alarm sounded. Her voice was even and controlled, but her focus was sharp. Elaine responded professionally and explained that the alarm settings were calibrated to ensure that any irregularity would be noticed immediately. She stated that the alarm was crucial for safety, particularly for children with severe respiratory conditions like Naomi. Roxanne nodded slowly, as though the explanation made sense, but she continued to look at the monitor. Her attention remained fixed for several seconds in silence. The quiet in the room lasted a little too long. I felt discomfort ripple beneath the surface. It was not loud or dramatic, but it was unmistakable. Mom visited later that afternoon. She hugged Naomi and spoke to her softly. She looked tired, as if she had not slept well. Roxanne spoke to Mom about the alarm again, but this time she framed it as sympathy, saying that Naomi had trouble sleeping and that the beeping might cause unnecessary stress. Mom sighed and rubbed her forehead. She said to me that maybe I was being overly cautious and that perhaps I needed rest. I listened, but I could not shake the feeling that something subtle was beginning to shift. It was as though someone was slowly moving pieces on a board while pretending not to. Elaine came in once more to adjust medication schedules. She noticed Roxanne watching the monitor again and made a brief comment that everything related to the alarms was strictly supervised. Her tone remained polite, but her eyes were careful. I understood that she had begun to take note. I felt a sense of quiet relief knowing someone else observed what I felt, even if neither of us said anything directly. That evening, as the room settled into dimmed lights and the sounds of the ward became softer, I realized I had started watching Roxanne. Not in suspicion, but in awareness. I began to see the shape of something that had been forming long before we ever entered that hospital. Her questions, her expressions, her subtle suggestions to Mom all carried something unspoken. Something that had been building for years. I did not have the full picture yet, but the first shift had already begun. I did not know that within only a few days that quiet shift would turn into a moment that would take 5 minutes to occur, and the rest of my life to understand. That night, the hospital wing had settled into the kind of stillness that felt heavy rather than quiet. The overhead lights were dimmed to a muted glow, and the air carried a faint scent of antiseptic and warm plastic from the respiratory equipment. Naomi was resting with her breathing steady and measured, and I felt the first small drop of relief I had experienced in days. I had not eaten since morning, and my hands were slightly shaking from exhaustion. I hesitated before leaving, but I told myself I would only be gone for a few minutes. I needed enough strength to remain present for Naomi. I told Roxanne I was going downstairs to the cafeteria, and she nodded while standing near the foot of the bed. The cafeteria was nearly empty at that hour. A tired vending machine hummed beside the wall, and the cashiers chatted softly at a distance. I poured myself a cup of coffee and chose a sandwich that I barely looked at. I sat for a moment and inhaled slowly. My shoulders felt like they had been holding weight for months. For the first time that day, there was no monitor beeping, no medical discussions, no decisions waiting to be made. Just quiet space. Yet the quiet did not feel peaceful. It felt tight, as if something unspoken was sitting beside me. I checked the time. I had only been away for 11 minutes. I stood up and began walking back upstairs, carrying the coffee, without drinking it. As I reached the pediatric recovery floor, the air felt thick again. When I turned the corner to Naomi's room, I noticed that the hallway monitor showed motion activity recorded earlier. The timestamp aligned nearly exactly with when I had left. A figure stood near the wall-mounted screen reviewing the display, but I continued walking, telling myself there was no reason to stop. When I entered the room, the first thing I noticed was Roxanne standing close to the monitor beside Naomi's bed. Her posture was very still, as if she had been studying something intently. She looked up when she heard me, and her expression shifted just slightly, not enough to define the emotion, but enough to feel it. Naomi let out a faint sound, something between a breath and a small gasp. I moved to the side of the bed immediately. The rhythm of her breathing was no longer steady. It was shallow and rapid, each inhale shorter than the last. I touched her hand and spoke her name softly, trying to help her anchor her breath. The monitor flickered with numbers that began slipping downward from their previous stability. I pressed the call button while keeping my focus on Naomi. Her chest rose quickly but did not expand enough to bring in air. I kept telling her to look at me, to listen to my voice, to stay present. I did not look at Roxanne until I heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. When Nurse Elaine entered, she saw the monitor and moved immediately with practiced urgency. Her voice was calm but firm as she asked what had happened. I opened my mouth to speak, but the moment stretched thin. I realized I had no clear understanding of what had occurred in the 15 minutes I had been away. I only had instinct and the heaviness that had been building for days. Elaine adjusted Naomi's oxygen support and called for respiratory assistance. Another nurse arrived quickly, and the room shifted into focused motion. I stepped back, unable to do anything except watch. Naomi's breaths remained short and uneven, and the alarm tone that filled the room felt louder than anything I had ever heard in my life. The coffee in my hand had grown cold, and my fingers trembled. I did not know yet what had caused the change, but something inside me understood that the shift had not been random. Something had been set in motion the moment I walked out of that room, and I had 15 minutes that would follow me forever. 5 minutes later, the atmosphere in the room had shifted in a way that was impossible to ignore. Naomi's breathing, which had already been uneven, began to falter in a pattern that felt wrong. I spoke her name and leaned closer, hoping to anchor her the way I always did when her breathing tightened. Her chest lifted, but the air she drew in was shallow and insufficient. I looked at the monitor to confirm what I already knew, but the numbers remained unchanged, as if the machine did not recognize what was happening. The alarm did not sound. The room felt too quiet, and the silence pressed against my ribs. I touched Naomi's cheek and called for help a second time, louder now, but still trying to keep my voice steady so she would not panic. Her lips began to pale in a way that made my vision narrow. I reached for the oxygen tubing to adjust it while calling her name again. Her eyelids fluttered and the small muscles at her throat strained with the effort of pulling in air. I pressed the emergency button on the wall. I did not look away from Naomi's face. The code team arrived quickly. Their pace was controlled but urgent as they assessed the situation. Elaine was among the first to enter and immediately recognized the severity of Naomi's respiratory distress. She called out medical instructions with calm clarity. A respiratory therapist adjusted the ventilatory support while another nurse prepared additional oxygen delivery. I stepped back because there was no space for hesitation. The room filled with deliberate movement and concentrated focus. Naomi's breaths became slower, then irregular, then nearly absent. The tension in the room tightened. One nurse prepared a manual ventilation bag while another adjusted monitors. Dr. Patel entered with steady footsteps and took over the scene with practiced command. Her voice was precise as she directed each action. They began manual ventilation to regain control of Naomi's breathing. My hands clenched together without realizing it. I could not feel my own breath. The monitor finally emitted a delayed alert, but it was already behind what the room had known. It rang out too late, echoing against the walls in a tone that seemed to accuse everything and everyone. The team worked rapidly, their hands steady and minds sharp. Naomi's chest rose again under their guidance, each rise controlled instead of natural. I watched her face, searching for any sign of returning stability. The minutes stretched. I could not measure them except through the rhythm of the team's movements. At last, Naomi's breathing pattern shifted towards something more regular. The color in her face began to return slowly, like a photograph developing one layer at a time. Her eyelids stopped fluttering and settled again. I felt my knees weaken, though I had not moved. When the crisis eased, Dr. Patel spoke quietly to me while the others finished stabilizing Naomi. Her expression was steady, but her words held weight. She stated that Naomi had been moments away from a point where recovery would have been impossible. She told me that prompt intervention had prevented permanent harm. She paused before she continued. The monitor should have alerted sooner. It had not. She said they would be reviewing why. I nodded because I could not speak. I looked at Naomi and let my hand rest beside hers on the blanket. Her breathing was supported, but it was present. The room slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm, but mine did not. I felt the edges of the truth forming sharp and unavoidable. 5 minutes had changed everything. The next day began with a stillness that made the events of the previous night feel suspended in the air, as if the room itself remembered every sound, every breath, every moment of fear. I had barely slept, choosing to remain at the side of my daughter Naomi, watching the subtle rise and fall of her breathing with a vigilance that my body could not release. Her condition remained fragile yet stable enough for the medical team to begin reviewing what had happened with the monitoring equipment during the episode. I sat upright in the chair while Dr. Patel entered with a tablet in her hand, her expression steady, but weighted with something she was preparing herself to say. She informed me that the hospital had already pulled the camera footage from the hallway and the room. They had also cross-checked it with the device activity logs that record every adjustment made to the respiratory monitor. Her voice remained even as she explained that the alarm feature had been manually disabled roughly 15 minutes before Naomi's breathing declined. I felt my chest tighten in a slow, cold way. The words did not feel real at first. Manually disabled. Not malfunction, not accident, not a failure of equipment. I asked who had been in the room during that time frame. Dr. Patel did not speculate. She stated only that the logs confirmed human input and that the footage was being reviewed. Her tone remained careful. I knew she was protecting the investigation. My mind was already racing ahead of the conversation. I did not want to say her name. I did not want to believe what my thoughts implied. I remained quiet until Dr. Patel left to continue the review process. When my mother arrived later that morning, she carried the same calm she always performed when she believed she needed to manage the situation on behalf of everyone else. Roxanne entered the room with her. I watched Roxanne's eyes move across the equipment, the monitors, the tubing, and then to Naomi. She greeted me with a softness that rested strangely on her face. I simply stared at her. My mother asked why I looked as if I had not slept. I did not respond immediately because I needed to maintain my control before speaking. I explained what Dr. Patel had told me. I spoke clearly without raising my voice because clarity was the only protection I had in that moment. My mother's expression shifted into disbelief, then into quick defense. She insisted there must have been an error. She insisted the hospital had misunderstood. She insisted that I was exhausted and reacting emotionally. She placed herself between the accusation and Roxanne without hesitation. Roxanne spoke with composure. She stated that she had done nothing except sit with Naomi and adjust her blanket when it slipped. She said she would never put Naomi at risk. Her voice remained controlled. She did not show fear. She did not show anger. She simply maintained her innocence with an ease that left no trace to grip. I felt something in me fracture. Not loudly, not visibly. It was a quiet split between what I had believed and what I could no longer ignore. I needed someone who would not get swept into denial or panic. That was when Fiona, my closest friend, arrived. She had come as soon as she heard there had been a medical emergency. One look at my face, and she understood that the crisis did not end with Naomi being stabilized. She listened while I explained the device logs. She did not interrupt. She did not soften her reaction. She simply placed her hand over mine and spoke quietly, telling me that this was no longer just a medical matter. It was something I needed to take to a prosecutor. In that moment, I realized that I did not have to face this alone. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a courtroom that felt colder than any hospital room I had spent those endless nights in. The walls were beige and unremarkable, but the air carried a quiet intensity. Everything was orderly, procedural, controlled, yet every second contained a weight that pressed against my ribs. Naomi was stable by then, still under close medical supervision, but well enough for me to leave her side for the hearing. Fiona sat beside me, her presence grounding me in a space where nothing else felt steady. My mother sat several rows back, silent, her expression unreadable. Roxanne sat at the defendant's table. The prosecutor reviewed the evidence with a deliberate clarity. Camera footage showed her standing beside the monitor for a sustained period. The equipment log recorded the moment the alarm had been disabled. There was no malfunction, no accidental input, no ambiguous interpretation of the data. The prosecutor outlined how Naomi's respiratory diagnosis required constant monitoring, how any disruption could result in hypoxia within minutes, and how those minutes could lead to irreversible damage. Dr. Patel was the first to testify. Her voice maintained the same steady tone she used in the hospital when explaining Naomi's condition. She detailed the medical implications of disabling the alarm, the timeline of Naomi's respiratory decline, and the rapid intervention required to save her life. She made it clear that the timing was precise. The manual adjustment aligned directly with the onset of Naomi's distress. Her testimony left no room for misinterpretation. Nurse Elaine spoke next. She described her interactions with Roxanne during the days leading up to the incident. She spoke calmly without exaggeration, recalling how Roxanne asked repeated questions about the device, specifically about the alarm function. She explained how she had initially assumed it was family concern, but later understood that the questions were focused and specific in a way that no casual visitor would need to know. There was a quiet heaviness in her voice when she said she wished she had recognized the intention sooner. Roxanne's attorney attempted to suggest stress, confusion, misjudgment, or misunderstanding. He asked whether the alarm could have been silenced accidentally. Both medical witnesses answered with firm certainty. There was no plausible scenario where the alarm could be turned off without direct intentional action. When Roxanne finally spoke, her tone remained even. She denied any harmful intent. She claimed she believed the alarm was malfunctioning and that turning it off would prevent unnecessary noise. She said she panicked. She said she thought she was helping. The judge listened without expression. The room remained still as she delivered her decision. The act was deliberate and reckless, with clear risk to the life of a vulnerable child. There was no justification, no mitigating factor that could reduce the severity. The sentence was custodial, immediate, and without the option of negotiation or reduction. The words carried no drama, but they carried finality. My mother exhaled sharply. Her shoulders lowered as if something inside her collapsed in on itself. She did not look at me. She did not look at Roxanne. She stared ahead as if the outcome existed in a world she had never prepared herself to face. I remained still. I did not cry. I felt something close, not like relief, not like victory, but like a door locking shut for the last time. When the courtroom emptied, I walked past Roxanne without speaking. I did not pause, not even for a moment. Whatever bond had once existed between us ended long before the sentence was spoken. I stepped outside into the late afternoon light, the air sharp and cool. I chose never to look back. The weeks after the trial passed with a quiet steadiness that felt unfamiliar. Naomi continued her recovery in small but meaningful steps. The doctors recommended respiratory rehabilitation and gentle physical exercise. I watched her relearn how to control her breath in moments when anxiety rose. I sat beside her during therapy sessions and learned how to guide her through those waves with patience and a calm presence. I understood that healing had to be slow in order to last. At home, I created routines that gave her a sense of predictability. We cooked simple meals together, and I read to her before bed. She sometimes asked questions about the hospital, questions about fear, questions about trust. I answered carefully. I wanted her to know she was safe now. I did not want fear to become a place she lived in. My relationship with my mother did not return to what it once was. She tried to call several times, her voice quiet, unsure, soft in a way I had not heard before. I did not answer. I understood that her grief was real, but I also understood that I had to protect my home and my daughter from the emotional patterns that had shaped us for so long. I chose silence not out of anger, but because some doors need to close in order for new ones to open. Fiona visited often. She reminded me to rest and to breathe. She helped me understand that the line between love and obligation can blur until we lose sight of ourselves. I needed space from the past in order to grow. I learned that love requires boundaries. It is not a lack of compassion to protect yourself. Love that has no structure, no limits, no accountability will damage everyone it touches. We are allowed to say no, even to family. We are allowed to step away when the cost of staying becomes too high. Healing begins when we stop apologizing for defending the life we are trying to build. Thank you for listening to my story. It took time for me to be able to speak about it without shaking. If you have ever had to set boundaries with someone you care about, or if you are trying to learn how I hope this offered something meaningful, I would like to hear your thoughts. What did this story make you think about? Please share in the comments below.